All right, hi everybody, welcome to Descard Gaming. I'm doing another response video. This time I thought we'd do Get Up in Games video of auto includes. So the idea behind his video was, are there some cards in the game that is an auto include for every single character? And I think his conclusion was that no, but there might be a few cards that are very close to it. And anyways, we're going to go through the video and I will give my opinions, responses, and see how much I agree with him, how much I don't. So without further ado, let's jump to his video. All right, so here we are. We're going to go into the big mode.
From the moment the specialized training player side scheme was revealed in the X23 announcement article, many players, including myself, declared this an auto-include in every deck going forward forever from now on. After all, what's not to love about this card?
All right, so let's talk about this one. So this is a player basic side scheme. So this is something new that's coming in next evolution, and I think this is great for the game. It gives us something new, something fun. And I think a lot of the chatter has been, will this break the game in a bad way, good way? Is it overpowered? What's going to happen, when this gets introduced into the game? Is everyone just going to be OP from it? So I have a couple ideas behind it. Far as what I think it's going to do for the game and is it balanced or whatnot. So first off, I will say I love this player size scheme. For a basic, I think it's really cool. So what this one is when you eliminate or when you defeat this player size scheme, there are these like 4 separate set aside upgrades that can come into play, and they're super good. They kind of remind me of the Red Skull campaign upgrades. If you've ever played the Red Skull campaign upgrades, you kind of know what I'm talking about, but it's like increases your defense. Every time you defend, you draw 1 card. There's one that increases your attack. Every time you do a basic attack, you draw 1 card, exhaust your specialized upgrade. And then there's one like even gain hit points every time you take a damage, exhaust, draw 1 card. So again, they're very solid. Now, I think 5 threat per player is very, I think, up there with schemes. So it's not going to be super easy. In fact, the more players you have when you try to play this card, be a lot harder to just take it off easily. And then you got to factor in things like Master Plan could come out, add 4 more, or if you're playing with on Standard 2, Expert 2, which is what's it called again? It's the worst version of Master Plan. Basically adds 2 more to every size scheme. So but what I was going to say is that I believe that this card is balanced if players are playing harder villains or harder modulars, and if they're playing maybe on harder difficult settings like Standard 2. Because ultimately what it boils down to is when you start the game of Marvel Champions, usually what you're doing is you're trying to control and build and get to a certain spot where you have enough resource generators, you have enough upgrades and stuff in play that you can start dishing out a lot of damage. But what makes it harder at the harder difficulties and harder modulars is when you have the villain has more tempo, or whatever difficulty you're playing on, there's more thrown at you, more things you have to deal with. Say the scheme has a tricky mechanic, or there's things out there that you need to address. So I think what I'm trying to say is that I believe player side schemes are balanced if players are customizing their games accordingly and giving the villain enough tools, enough, when I say tools, I'm talking about, a modular that might synergize well with them, or putting in maybe a standard 2 or giving them more activations. So what that will do is it will cause players to have to address those threats before they can kind of address the specialized, say, training. So I think it's like a balancing act with player size games. If the villain is not giving you enough threat, if the villain's not get enough tempo, then you can spend your time threading off a player size game, and then you have this cascade effect where you're going to get super powerful because it's going to up your basic, and then you get card advantage. So I think it's a slippery slope. Like if players make the game, if they're playing on standard and easy modular, then yes, the game, in my opinion, will be kind of a little bit easy, like the Red Skull feeling when you got the Red Skull upgrades, and Red Skull didn't really get anything to make them harder. You just got a lot more powerful. But yeah, if you're playing a S tier villain, Magneto, Ronin, Venom Goblin, you don't have a lot of luxury to be like, oh, I'm going to spend some time, thwarting specialized training, because everything is especially like a lot of these villains, they've got a lot of face down counter cards dealt, got a lot of activations. So you got to think about surviving. You got to think about controlling side schemes. So that's where I think a player size scheme can be balanced in Marvel Champions. And I think really what it boils down to is the player, like almost like a dungeon master, almost, even though I don't play D&D, but making sure that the game that you set up is enough pressure. Because like for instance, if you're playing Absorbing Man, or like a really weak villain that doesn't threaten you, is quite slow, and so you have all day to set up your upgrades and supports, and then threat that out, scheme, just defeat that scheme, I'm trying to say. And I think this is just going to make players really, really powerful, and the villain is going to get weaker and weaker. But why I think it can be balanced is basically what I'm saying is if you have maybe standard 2 you're playing with, or if you add a tougher modular that gives the villain a little bit more tempo boost, or synergizes that villain a little bit more to make him more dangerous, then I believe it's going to be tougher to defeat these player side schemes. So that's a long answer, but I figure this will be a big question on my comments. Like, Descry, do you feel player size schemes are going to be fair? Are they going to wreck the game? Now, this is all me just from what I know about Marvel Champions. This is my prediction on player size schemes. That bottom line is, if you play on very easy settings, i.e. standard 1, easy modulars, very low tier villains, and then you throw these in and other player size games, yes, the game is going to be extremely easy, because these are definitely power creeping us a lot. But if you play with harder difficulty, harder modulars, harder villains, you're not going to have the luxury to always like easily, get specialized training out of the defeated. And then also, if you're playing on those hard difficulties, a master plan or the expert 2 one that also adds a whole bunch of threat, when that pops out, that could, make it harder to get rid of. So that's basically all I'm going to say about that. But let's hear what Get Up and Game has to say about this.
It's basic. It only costs 1. And then once you remove 5 threat from it, you get to put into play one of the linked specialist upgrades.
So yeah, you can see in this video, you've got combat specialists, surveillance specialists, defense specialists, and frontline specialists. And I really love the I like the what am I trying to say? Like I like that they really specialized in, attack, thwart, defense, taking hits. I like how they kind of went with specialization, right? So, and I think people are going to enjoy that because say you're like Hulk and you're like, oh, I'm the frontline specialist. I have a lot of HP. I'm going to defend it for you. I'm going to take undefended attacks. Yes, let me take that one. Or Spider Ham or something like that. And then if you're like a justice player or you love to thwart a lot, then obviously you want the surveillance specialist. But yeah, I like them a lot. I wonder why so they cost two because I guess if you get a caught off guard or a thing that targets your upgrades, they could potentially be discarded and then you have to replay them again. But yeah, let's continue here.
That gives your hero either +1 attack, defense, or thwart, or +4 hit points, and then lets you draw a card for doing a very basic common action. Very little risk, incredible reward. Seems like a no-brainer, so let's just always save one spot in every deck we build from now on for this side scheme, right? Well, there might be a few reasons why you might choose not to include specialized training. For example, if you're playing a rush strategy.
Yeah, so 100% agree with him there. This would be way too slow for a rush down hero deck or a rush down team deck. You want to be attacking the villain constantly and get the villain dead ASAP, no build. So yeah, this would not be put into a rush strategy. 100% agree.
Then you're not really going to have time to hang around and clear 5 threat from this when you're trying to end the game in 3 turns. And even if you're not playing rush, some solo games are just short enough that by the time you get this side scheme on the table, cleared, and get the upgrade in play, the game might be nearing its conclusion. Another reason...
Yeah, I think this player size scheme definitely is more of important in multiplayer. Like you get more out of it because it's like doubling, tripling depending on the player count. And solo, yeah, I guess you could say it's still nice in solo, but definitely you're really the players are really gaining the advantage as you increase the player count on it.
Why you might not always include this in your deck is there is a limit to the number of player side schemes that can be in play at a time. If you're playing 1 or 2 players, there's only allowed to be 1 player side scheme in play, and if you're playing 3 or 4, there's only allowed to be 2. And many of the other player side schemes might help you deal with a more pressing issue, giving them precedence. And if specialized training is taking up space on the board because it does require 5 threat per player, which is higher than all the rest of them, then...
So I would maybe slightly disagree with him on that could be a factor why not to include it. I don't think people are going to like the people that are probably going for the player side scheme strategies are probably going to have tools to deal with side schemes effectively. So having a side scheme just stay out there for a long time, probably not going to be the case. But that being said, 3 to 4 players, they can have a maximum of 2 out. Again, I think that's having 2 out is enough. But maybe 1 to 2 players, when you're just allowed to have 1 out only, especially if, this one is a 5 per player, so it's 10. My whole thing goes back to, if you get basically rushed by the villain, if the villain is giving you a lot of tempo, a lot of stuff to deal with, that could stick out there for quite a long time, and then a master plan could proc it and causing more threat. But I don't know. I'm on the fence whether that is a good reason why not to play it, because you can only play 1 player size scheme in a 1 to 2 player and 2 in a 3 to 4 player. I don't think that is a second reason to really not include it, but you never know. I could be wrong on that, but I'm more leaning towards probably not.
This might be blocking you from playing another one that's more important. And finally, particularly for solo, aggression and protection aren't the best at removing threat. So depending on the hero you're playing, that 5 extra threat you're adding to the board just might never get cleared because you're probably struggling to keep up with what the villain is doing.
So I would actually disagree with Get Up in Game on aggression. Going into next evolution, we have cards that could attach to a side scheme, and you can use your attack for your your thwart stat. So if your attack is like 5, 6 or whatever, that is now your thwart. Now you could say, well, how do you get 5 or 6 attack? So aggression has lots of ways. There's brute force. There's fluid motion. There's your combat training. There's some in your toolkit. There's some things that kind of boost your attack sometimes. So I think aggression can be very effective now with schemes. Based on what I'm seeing now that they have, there is I agree with them. Protection is definitely still not great at dealing with side schemes, but although there is a new thing you can attach to a side scheme and protection that I believe every time you defend successfully, you can proc this attachment to remove threat, which could be really good if you're in a high player count and you're always ready, defend. But I think aggression has a little bit more tools to deal with side schemes now. I would put protection still in last place for side schemes, but I don't know. I think aggression could actually just be off number 3 and just put down protection. But yeah, that's my opinion.
Now, all those being said, speaking just for me personally, this is still practically an auto-include because I tend to play a lot of control decks, even in aggression and protection, that should have the time and ability to clear it, and I never play rush. So for my money, this is just about as close to an auto-include as it gets.
I don't know why nobody likes to play rush. I will say this about it. It's a viable strategy. Now, granted, you can't rush every villain in the game, but you could probably rush, I would say, 70% or so of the villains. You can straight up rush them down. On expert and standard, it's even easier to do it. But no, I mean, and I don't think, here's what I think is, I don't necessarily think like people have a problem with the rush game in Marvel Champions. I think maybe people don't know how to successfully do it against the majority of villains out there. Like, of course, yes, it's there's some villains out there that are quite easy to just rush, but there are harder villains, and you have to do a little bit more thinking how to defeat them with a rush strategy. But I would say I like rushing from time to time. But again, there are some villains that you just cannot rush. It's not even an option. They're just the way that they're designed. You can't do it. So going back to, he would pretty much says he would auto include this pretty much in every play, almost basically what he's saying. I would say maybe, because I mean, if you're in a scenario where the villain is putting fire to you right off the bat, and there's a lot of crazy things happening mechanically, and there's a lot of stuff going on, that you might have to really focus on surviving, controlling, dealing with whatever you have to deal with against the villain. And like, I'll give you a good example, like and it's not a scenario I really like, but you have Nebula, you have Collector 1. Those scenarios require you to, like, there's a tax almost where you have to exhaust and pay resources to keep counters down or get cards out of the collection. So, those type of scenarios, definitely are kind of forcing the players to be more conservative with what they're doing. Like, you're trying to get upgrades and supports down. You also have to think about that, but then you have to think about, other things. So again, I would probably say, yeah, if I'm playing most my games in multiplayer, I probably run this one, but I could see myself not running it, and definitely not running it at all if I'm doing a rushdown game. But yeah, so I would kind of agree with him, but I think there's going to be some villains that you probably don't even want to run this, because it's just there's so much tempo against you that you need all your resources to kind of survive and slightly get things under control before dealing with, this player side scheme quest thing.
But that does make me wonder, are there any actual true auto includes in Marvel Champions? A card that you will just include in every single deck, no matter which hero you're playing, from now on, forever.
So I saw his video, so I know what he's gonna say. But the funny part, well, I do agree with him. And let's just hear what he says. So,
well, when the question is asked that way, then my answer is no. I don't believe there is a single card in Marvel.
I like that he chose a spider for the image. I don't know. I just think that's kind of cute. Nope, and there's a spider.
Champions that belongs in every single deck, no matter the player count, no matter the hero chosen, no matter the scenario going up against. Are always enough variables to keep any card from being an auto include, and that's a good thing. We wouldn't want there to be any cards constraining.
Yeah, so I do agree with him. I'm actually very down with what he's saying. Of course, there are some cards I believe in the game that are very close to being almost auto include in most decks. But in general, the game is there's a lot of cards out there. The pool is huge, and you have a lot of flexibility for different strategy types, archetypes for building certain decks and what you want to do. Do you want to spend a lot of time in altar? Do you want to try to proc wilds and different resource types? Then you're going to build and include, different cards. And I mean, most decks follow a certain, type of flow, like the 3 doubles resources, yada, yada, yada. But what you're going to see with him and with me is there's certain heroes that just do better with certain cards and they get more value out of it. And those are sort of auto includes most of the time for those type of heroes.
Our creativity or imagination, making us feel like we always have to include this card or that card, or we're not building optimized decks. Now, that being said, I think there are quite a few cards that come really, really close to being auto includes in the right situations. And that's what I really want to be talking about in this video. Cards that are practically auto includes, because when we use that term, we don't necessarily mean it literally, but it's more just really, really good cards that are always at least considered for certain situations. And I think the obvious closest ones to that are, of course, the double resource cards. These do get included in probably 99% of Marvel Champions decks that get built. I know I pretty much always throw them in every deck without thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's 99%, but it's definitely very high percent. The reason behind it is because a lot of your identity upgrades or supports or what, stuff that you have to put down, a lot of them cost maybe 2 resources, 3 sometimes. And then sometimes your key events like a Hulk smash or things that you really want to play, like a lightning bolt from Storm. That's again, the double basics are going to help you ramp into those cards and play them easier. So yeah, I definitely agree with him. I mean, I would say this card is the most auto include type card for most hero decks. But again, it's if you're doing, say, a Hulk rush deck and aggression, you don't even want to run double power, double genius, double fist, and then the power ofs and aggression. So there's certain kind of depending on what you're going for, it's not always going to be the case where you're going to run all 3 of them. But for the most part, I definitely agree with him. It's pretty much a staple in most decks.
Too hard about it. Though there are a few situations you might choose not to include these. I've built some Drax protection decks that didn't include the doubles because the only cards I included were 0 and 1 cost protection cards, and his kid.
Right, that's a good example right there.
He doesn't really need them just for his cards, and you don't really want to be drawing these if you don't have something to play them with. Outside of that, maybe Star-Lord or Spider-Ham, people who can really generate resources very well on their own, might not need them in certain builds, but still, the vast majority of the time, I'm bringing these along. So these are probably as close to actual auto-includes as we get. But there is a handful of other basic cards that I feel like are also pretty darn close and are good enough that they're likely at least considered for every single deck you build. Starting with the Helicarrier, there's very few reasons not to bring one of these along.
I kind of think Fantasy Flight should have made that like a unique card, because it is very strong. Like the fact that you can make any other player's card reduces costs that phase by 1, and you can do it out of player turn because it's action keyword. So but yeah, it's really good card. I think, yeah, again, it depends on are you going for more of a rush? Are you going for more not as a SimCity type deck with lots of supports and upgrades? And you might not want to run that, but definitely Helicarrier is really good if you're running a hero that has not too many resource generators. This is a good card to kind of help that hero out. Like Valkyrie and stuff. Let's keep going.
You might just choose not to because you have other resource generators at your disposal. If you're a hero that can make good use of team building exercise or deft focus, those are cheaper options to the Helicarrier. But even just putting one Helicarrier in any deck is likely going to benefit you from time to time. So I think the Helicarrier is pretty close to potentially being an auto-include, because it really is just so useful, and especially in multiplayer. And keep in mind, everything I say is heavily solo biased, but especially in multiplayer.
I mean, nobody's going to complain like, oh, you're running Helicarrier, because I mean, you can help your teammate with it. There's a lot of times where you're playing Marvel Champions and you're like, oh man, if I just have one more resource, I could put this down, and do this if I just have one more. And that's where, when you want to use my Helicarrier, there you go. So it's a very good support card. I definitely like it. But I don't put it in every single deck that I make. It really depends on what I'm trying to do with a particular deck, because sometimes I'm trying to get that 40 card deck. And if I'm trying to do a certain kind of thing with that deck, I might need all the card slots as possible, But in a lot of my decks, I do like Helicarrier. I think it's a great support card.
Helicarriers on the board are super helpful, so I think those come pretty close to being auto-includes. There's also a handful of allies that I think are just so good, you're basically just choosing not to include them, being Ironheart, Nick Fury, Professor X, Mockingbird, and Blade. Every single one of these allies can do so much for you that the only reason I can think of to choose not to include them is largely down to theme. If you're playing
so I think really also if you're running a tribal deck, so if say you're running kind of an adventure theme deck where you want to have upgrades and supports get the full bonus because you have to have all Avenger characters, or say with X-Men with Utopia and different supports and leadership and stuff. So that's where I wouldn't run, I got to run Ironheart, got to run Nick Fury. No. So I think those type of tribal decks, you want to stick with the theme to get the most out of your supports and upgrades. But yeah, Ironheart's very solid, Nick Fury. All these cards, I would say Blade is maybe not. I don't know if Blade should be in there. He is very cool in the fact that if you have a lot of physicals, he doesn't really take consequential damage. He's a very, for one cost, you could just use him as a chump blocker. He's definitely, not a bad card, but I don't know if I'm like, always like, oh yeah, every deck I make, I want to put Blade in, but definitely has his home in some decks, and he's, pretty good. Yeah, I think Mockingbirds has always been a very, very good basic 3-cost card. And Professor X is super, super good. The Confuse is better than a stun in most cases. And the fact that you get a 3 thwart out of it and a chump block, that shocked me. I was kind of surprised how, and anybody can play it. You don't have to have the X-Men trait. So that kind of shocked me. Fantasy Flight dropped us definitely a banger right there. And I mean, Nick Fury has always been, I always look at like Nick Fury as like the Gandalf, but he's always solid. But I don't always run these cards, or especially Blade, but I don't always run these cards in every deck. I usually, if I'm running lots of allies, it's usually like tribal. I will try to run it all X-Men, all Shield. But you can mix and match a bit. That's definitely, you know, but let's hear him keep going.
Avengers deck, for example, running things like Mighty Avengers and Avengers Tower. You don't want all these non-Avengers getting in the way because you want to be taking advantage of those bonuses. Similarly, the X-Men, you know, if you're wanting to play To Me My X-Men, if you're wanting to have Utopia out and everything you play is going to ready another X-Men, you don't necessarily want all of these in the way. But outside of that, just the sheer efficiency of Ironheart and Nick Fury with the card draw and the block is always, always helpful. Professor X giving a deck 3 thwart and a what?
Yeah, so I'm just going to fast forward a little bit because we got a lot of ground to cover. We're going to go to this next thing that he's recommending.
I was only able to find 1 leadership card and 1 justice card that I think fit that bill. That being Maria Hill for leadership and Under Surveillance for justice, mainly for solo. I think if you're playing leadership and you're not running Maria Hill, the only reason is, again, because you're doing all X-Men or all Avengers or something like that. Because what she does for you for her cost, and again, especially in multiplayer, there are very, very few good reasons not to put her in any deck that can have leadership cards. And if you're running a solo Justice deck,
Yeah, I definitely agree. Under Surveillance in solo is almost practically an auto-include if you're Justice player. There are some scenarios like I think it's the Sentinel scenario in Mutant Genesis where the main scheme does like a reset thing, and so like obviously that's not going to help you there. So there's some scenarios that where Under Surveillance isn't really needed, but in the majority of scenarios out there, it's very useful, and it's very, very useful in solo, extremely valuable in solo. Maria Hill is pretty much a staple in solo and in multiplayer. She's so good. In fact, I think this is a good example of a card that was definitely maybe too good for its cost and everything. And the fact you can recur her, rapid response her, you can do all these different things with her, make the calls. And it's a very powerful card. And I guess you could debate, is this card too good? You know, I think honestly, if we're being honest, fellas, maybe it should be a 3 cost, or keep it at 2 costs, but then have maybe limited once per phase. Draw 1 card, you know, or something like that, because there's ways to activate her multiple times in a round or in a phase sometimes, and that's where it seems to get kind of like broken, especially when you do 2, 3, 4 players. It's really, really crazy how good that card is. But yeah, am I always running Maria Hill? Again, if I'm doing a tribal deck, and I think he mentioned that's maybe the only time you wouldn't really want to run, because she then can get in your way of your like bonuses and everything. But pretty much if you're not running a tribal deck and you're running leadership, this is an auto include pretty much. But yeah.
Surveillance, I usually don't even think twice. Now, if you are playing against a scenario that has one big scheme, like a Loki or a Thanos or a Hela, I don't necessarily bring it in those situations, and that's what keeps it from being considered a true auto-include. But outside of that, throwing one of these on the main scheme just gives you so much freedom and peace of mind and breathing room that I pretty much always bring one of these in almost.
Okay, yeah. So let's go to the next one. All right.
A certain trait, you might always want to have certain cards. If I'm playing the Mystics, Adam Warlock, Doctor Strange, and Scarlet Witch, I can tell you I'm always including Sorcerer Supreme, and I'm always bringing all the copies.
So I would say definitely Sorcerer Supreme if you're playing a Mystic. That is an auto include. If you're not auto including Sorcerer Supreme, then you're just missing out on that extra card every round in Hero, which is huge. But Spiritual Meditation, I don't think that's necessarily an auto include. It is a very good event card. Again, if you're trying to hit that 40 card limit and there's key cards that you're trying to fit into your deck, you might want to just run one only, or maybe not at all. It really boils down to, do you have enough room for maybe, a Spiritual Meditation? Like, for me, like, yeah, I like that card. But sometimes when you're deck building, you're trying to hit that 40 card limit, and there might be, in order to get your deck to really to flow nicely, you might need 3 of this and 2 of this, and sometimes you can't afford any deck space for a Spiritual Meditation. But no, I definitely think it's a good card. I wouldn't say it's an auto include for me, but I would say Sorcerer Supreme definitely auto include if you're running a Mystic.
Spiritual Meditation, I can. 3 for these guys and 1 for him.
Wow, so he's 3. Okay.
Those cards are so good, and you can only use them while playing Mystics. I consider those auto includes every single time I play those heroes. Similarly, the Mystic spells that are available in each aspect come really, really, really close. If I'm playing Adam Warlock, I'm likely playing all 4 of these every single time.
Yeah, me too.
If I'm playing Doctor Strange or Scarlet Witch, it only takes up 1 spot in your deck, and the effects are so useful that I'm almost always guaranteed to include whichever aspect that I'm running. I'm going to bring that spell with me. And when it comes to Doctor Strange, Cosmo used to be an auto-include, but unfortunately, thanks to the 1.5 errata, no longer.
Yeah, so the new rules, basically Cosmo has been neutered. He's still okay, but yeah, huge nerf. I mean, it was broken what he was able to do with Doctor Strange and some other things he could do in scenarios and whatnot. But going back to the spells, I think Zone of Silence, where you're discarding up to 4 cards and you do the threat removal, I think that's more Adam Warlock's type of card, because he wants to discard stuff, because he can use his identity event to get a discarded card back and play it. I don't necessarily think you want to play Zone of Silence with the other Mystics. Not as much, because especially when you first play or you're setting up, you don't want to discard a really important upgrade or support. So, and then the other spells are very useful, but I would say Zone of Silence, I would probably play that more with Adam Warlock than the other Mystics.
Now, while the Mystic trait cards definitely verge on auto-include territory for me, interestingly, I don't know if the Psionic cards do. These are all really interesting cards, but I think they're a little bit more deck dependent. So if I am playing Phoenix, and with the upcoming Cable and Psylocke, I don't know that I'm always including these every single time. For example, Psychic Kicker, if I'm not running a lot of allies, and you're playing leadership, so likely you are, but this is still a card that you have to sort of build the deck around. This doesn't necessarily go in every single leadership deck, as opposed to the Mystic cards. Those cards are just so ubiquitously useful. It doesn't matter what kind of deck you build, you might as well bring them. And I think that's true for all of these. Psychic Assault is pretty universally useful, unless you're going against a steady or stalwart villain. It's not as good. Psychic Misdirection, there's just so many good protection cards that this one might not.
I mean, I think the psionic cards that he's showing here are very, very strong, and they're very, very good cards. But obviously, yeah, there's if you're against stalwart or steady, then you might not want to run Psychic Assault as much. But Psychic Manipulation is very, very solid. Psychic Misdirection is a great card, I think. And Psychic Kicker is really good. They're all really good. I usually almost always auto include a few of them or all of them. But again, I just from my playtesting, when I play a psionic character, I always get good mileage out of these cards. So yeah.
Always be the best choice if there's not going to be consistent other enemies for you to redirect the attack to. And Psychic Manipulation, while very, very good, is also kind of pricey. So they're likely going to bring Lay Down the Law, Surprise Attack, Perseverance, or Moxie. Whichever aspect they're running, if I'm playing a hero that can use those, like Vision, or Wasp, or Shadowcat, Spectrum, Ant-Man, someone who's likely to be changing forms very frequently, particularly while staying within hero form, you could also consider these for heroes like Ms. Marvel that like to go to Alter Ego and back frequently, but these truly shine in heroes that can change form and stay in hero form. You're probably going to be including these in any deck that you build with these heroes, making them very close.
Yeah, so he's talking about the heroes that can change form, and they are very good with those type of events that say after you change form, such as Lay Down the Law, Surprise, Moxie. So I think, yeah, for the most part, usually when you're playing those type of heroes, you usually want to include those type of cards. Not 100% of the time, but like in most deck builds with those heroes, it's very easy to proc, and they're a little bit more powerful than the average event card for that cost. So yeah, I mean, again, and what this is illustrating, guys, is basically some heroes are more tailored towards certain cards than other heroes, meaning they're more auto includes. So, which is cool. I mean, I think that's what you want in Marvel Champions. You don't want every hero to be like, oh, yeah, every hero is going to run this because this card is just so good. It's nice when you have heroes in the game that are uniquely sort of different, how they play, their strengths, weaknesses. And that's what's fun about deck building, right? So when you're deck building with Vision or deck building with Spectrum, you're probably deck building a little bit differently because those characters have very unique mechanisms and mechanics that allow you to do cool things. So, yeah.
Close to being auto includes. But there, again, are situations where you might not. Like, Kitty doesn't really need Perseverance. She's so good at preventing damage anyway. The Tufts aren't as useful. Now, you still might choose to bring it, but it's a little bit less useful than, say, for Ant-Man, who would really, really love those. And Moxie, I think, only makes it into leadership builds where there's at least a decent amount of readying involved. Spending this resource to play this card just for the one activation, if you're not planning on readying your hero, isn't always as great either. Lay Down the Law and Surprise Attack probably make it into every Justice and Aggression deck for these heroes because they're just so efficient for the cost. So I think those are really, really close to being auto-includes. For a few more considerations for those two. For me, Limitless Stamina is pretty much an auto-include in every hero that can include them.
Okay, so very good basic event card. Very, very solid. Now, it can only be utilized in those higher health heroes such as Hulk, Thor, SPDR, and I think there's a few more. But anyways, I definitely think it's a very good event card. Again, for me, what it boils down to, when I'm making a deck, I'm usually trying to do something interesting with the deck with the certain aspect I'm in and try to synergize that aspect with my hero that I picked. And a lot of times, I'm trying to get this 40 card deck. So just running 3 of those, a lot of times that's gonna fill up that 40 card deck that I'm trying to build. So yeah, in some cases I might run 1 or 2, but there's sometimes, like with the strategy I'm not really going for that ready type strategy. So it's not always an auto include for me, but yeah, I would say it's definitely a very solid auto include for most type of deck building with those type of heroes. But I would tell people, like, sometimes you're not going for this type of ready type build with the hero aspect that you're choosing. So you might not want to run it, right? So you get more mileage out of limitless stamina if your readies mean a lot more. Like if your attack goes up higher than normal, or your thort goes up higher than normal. So that's where you get the benefit really out of it. But very solid card.
So Colossus, Drax, Hulk, She-Hulk, Thor, and SPDR, all heroes that can make use of a ready for only one resource. That's pretty much an auto-include for me. I rarely build decks with these heroes that don't include 3 copies of Limitless Stamina. Particularly in Everybody But SPDR, they really want to make use of their very high attack stats that they can get up to. And SPDR has so many options of all the different ways she can use her basic activation, and she has a lot of readies anyway, that I tend to play her with a very stat boost and ready style just built in. So having 3 more readies for 1 seems really good. Though I think if anybody doesn't need it, she's probably the closest one that maybe I wouldn't consider an auto-include.
She has a ready in her toolkit
so easily. But for these 5, I don't know that I would ever build a deck without 3 copies of Limitless Stamina. So I think this is a really, really close to being considered an auto-include.
I mean, it's a solid card. Very solid card.
Another card that's pretty much an auto-include for me and any heroes that can do it is Ever Vigilant. And mainly, I mean the heroes that have access to aerial pretty...
I don't know if it's like an auto-include for me. It's, I mean, for heroes that can get aerial fairly easy, or just have aerial to begin with, like Spectrum, yes, it's definitely, I think, a great card. But again, I think in solo, it might not be the best card in solo because the accumulation of scheme is usually not accumulating super high in solo per round. And you might be overkilling the threat on the main. But I think in multiplayer, it's a little bit better because usually the main's always going to have a decent amount of threat on it. But yeah, it's a solid card. Again, I would probably not want to go into Ever Vigilant as much as if it's a little harder for my hero to get aerial. But yeah, I'm not necessarily saying auto-include this, but because there's other good readies. There's Repurpose for 0 cost. There's a couple other protection cards that are lower cost already. I mean, there's the one that's physical that heals you and readies. So again, and that doesn't require aerial.
Much from the beginning of the game, or can get it incredibly easy, like Ironheart, who gets it at level 2, and then Thor gets it from the hammer. Spectrum has it naturally. Nova gets it from his helmet. And Rogue can very easily access aerial by putting touched on an ally. Ever Vigilant is just such a good card. Protection once that threat removal are pretty much auto-includes for Web Warriors and Champions decks. Web of Life and Destiny does require allies to be useful, so it doesn't just automatically work with the heroes, but the Web Warrior allies are so good that if you are playing a hero...
I will say right off the bat, Web of Life, Destiny, if you're running a few Web Warrior characters, this is an auto-include for sure. The only time I don't really run that, like I have a Gwen Stacy deck where I don't really run Web Warriors that much, maybe 1 or 2. And yeah, it's, I'm doing something other with her. But no, very solid card. Again, if you're playing in a team game, and it could be the other, so you could play this, and if your other teammate is running Web Warrior allies, everyone gets the benefit of it because it's just a response. It just says after a Web Warrior ally leaves play, choose a player. So it's pretty good in multiplayer if you're playing Web Warriors and stuff. Definitely an auto-include in that type of format, but yeah, I think like Gwen Stacy is a good example of where I don't auto-include that, but and go for the champions with the new play rules. This is now out of the game when you use it. I still think it's an extremely good card. It's good for just, when you're getting to maybe a flip of the villain, this might be a perfect time to play it because the villain gets stronger You might get a whole bunch of encounter cards dealt with you, and those could be activations. So being basically immune to damage for the following round also stops retaliate as well. So I think it's I think it's a great card. Still a great card. It was just totally broken when they released it without remove it from the game. And yeah, in solo play, you could say it's less broken in solo. But yeah, as you increase the player count, it just gets way, way too good. But now with the new rules, it's back to being, a good, a balanced card per se.
That can use them. I think it's unlikely that you're not taking advantage of those awesome Web Warrior allies. And if you are, then this is just so easy to throw into a deck and draw a bunch of extra cards when they leave play. And Go for Champions, particularly with the errata, I think actually makes this card more attractive. Before, it just felt like a degenerate strategy to have that in your deck, and for some players, that's not very interesting. But now that it's errata to remove itself from the game after you play it, I think having this in every champion deck and then just using it on the turn where it makes the most sense is something that should just likely happen for every champion deck. So I think these are both incredibly, incredibly close to being considered auto-includes for the heroes that can use them. I mentioned the Helicarrier towards the beginning of this video, and one reason I think you might choose not to bring one of those is if you're playing a hero that can make really good use of Def Focus. Heroes like Quicksilver, Groot, Shadowcat, Storm, Vision, Spider-Woman, Adam Warlock, Colossus, Rogue, Spectrum, so many. These heroes have so many superpowers in their deck.
Yeah, oops, blurred. Okay, Def Focus, amazing build card. This card is a 1-cost card. And again, if you're playing certain heroes that have a lot of superpower event cards, which there's quite a bit out there on the roster that use superpower events, even for upgrades too. If it has a superpower trait, you can exhaust it. I mean, you can't beat that, a 1-cost upgrade. And again, it boils down to if your hero has a lot of those type of cards. It's a great build card, very cheap, very easy to get it out there. And I think I love that card. So yeah, again, auto include always when I'm playing a particular hero that has a lot of the superpower cards in their deck. Definitely going to auto include that. And I believe he's on the same boat with me.
That including a Def Focus to help pay for those is such a cheap resource generator that you'd be really unlikely not to include one of these every time you're playing one of these heroes. So I think this definitely could be considered an auto-include whenever you're playing any of these. Not quite as cheap and not quite as ubiquitous, but I think for the right heroes, team building exercise becomes an auto-include. The main ones I'm thinking of.
Yeah, like Spider-Ham, I think Phoenix. There's a few heroes out there that have a lot of traded cards that either refer to one of their traits that they have in their hero side. But yeah, I would say not all heroes want to run this card. You have to kind of look again, similar to Def Focus, but he pretty much says the same thing. I think he gives Spider-Ham as an example, and Thor and stuff like that, which, yeah, I agree. And Ant-Man. So let's keep going because this is taking quite a bit to get through this. So let's see what he says about endurance.
That is going to greatly improve my economy.
So I agree with him on that one as well.
Endurance is a card that might be considered an auto-include. After all, for only 1 resource, you get 3 extra hit points, so it basically functions like a good protection event and is rarely not going to be useful. But for me, it is an auto-include anytime I'm playing Drax, Spider-Ham, or Venom, just because these are heroes that want to be making use of their health pools to fuel what they're trying to do.
Yeah, and again, he's definitely on the right page in my eyes. Like, he's really looking at the heroes and looking at what they do. Like, Drax wants to take a lot of damage to get, or doesn't really want to take damage, but he wants to take attacks to get his counters up. In order to do that, you sort of have to have high health. So yeah, endurance makes perfect sense. Spider-Ham likewise, and Venom. So that's kind of the main theme of basically what he's talking about. What I'm talking about is depending on, you might be playing a higher difficulty with a lot more overkill or just more indirect damage. Again, endurance would be a good choice in a deck. So it really boils down to heroes or what type of difficulty, villain. Endurance could be a good choice.
So getting 3 extra health for only 1 resource is very worthwhile bringing in every single one of the decks I build for those heroes. And Rocket and Hawkeye might just always want one to help with their very low health pools and very few ways to defend themselves. One element many heroes happen to possess is having access to a really good defense card. And anytime I'm playing one of those heroes, I always bring Jocasta if I'm playing protection. For me, she is a guaranteed include anytime I'm playing protection with Vision, with Venom, Valkyrie, now that has been eroded to have the defense trait.
Valkyrie protection.
Storm, Spider-Man, Spectrum, Shadowcat.
Yeah. Again, for the heroes that have a really good defensive event, that's kind of like an auto-include. I agree with them on that. So let's go to the next one.
Heroes. For example, if I'm playing Black Panther, I always bring Avengers Mansion and I always bring Lockjaw. These 2 cards make into every Black Panther deck I build because he has those 3 Vibraniums. He has a lot.
Surprised he didn't use Hulk for Lockjaw.
Once he gets his Wakanda upgrades on the board, your second deck pass, sometimes you draw way more resources than you need. So Lockjaw makes for a really nice card to have in your discard pile to make use of those extra Vibraniums laying around. And Avengers Mansion is so easy to get on the table because he has so many resources and he wants cards to go with those resources that I always bring these 2 cards when I'm playing Black Panther. I don't think it's too surprising that if you're playing Black Widow, Injustice, Agent Coulson is a guaranteed deck slot.
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm going to play the rest of the stuff, but he's just basically going through certain heroes that obviously synergize well with what they do. Like Black Widow gets the prep cards. She gets benefits from playing prep cards, so therefore Agent Coulson's really good. She also has Safe House and other things like that to do. But yeah, and then he goes into Captain Marvel about the Coin Carrier. You can use the Wild to make it a lightning to heal and cycle a card, and so yeah, and then he's. But so I agree everything what he's saying here in these last few examples. But basically, he's what I agree with him, and what you're seeing here is just certain heroes have a little bit more worth when it comes to certain cards, right? And that's usually what you usually want to auto include in most decks, based on that. Now he has a conclusion part. Let's just quickly, because I forget what he says in his conclusion. Okay.
So when thinking about auto includes, those are all the cards that came to mind for me. Cards that see a lot of play on my table and are guaranteed to be included in the situations I described. But I want to hear from you. Which cards do you always include in certain situations? Do you have any cards that you put in every single deck you build no matter what? If you enjoyed this video, please click the like button and consider subscribing to the channel. And I look forward to seeing you next time we get up in game.
All right, so that's going to wrap things up, but I'll try to answer Josh's question. I think it's hard for me. I don't really have an always auto include in every deck I make. Again, it kind of boils down to exactly what he and I was discussing. It really boils down to the type of hero you're playing, the aspect, and how much worth you're getting out of that particular card with that particular hero. Or strategy, what you're doing, and then what else do you want to say here? But there'll be a link in the description for Get Up in Games channel. So if you kind of liked what he was talking about, you can go to his channel and subscribe and see more of his stuff. The other thing I would say is I pretty much agreed with almost everything that he said in his video. And usually I'm disagreeing with a lot of things when it comes to these response videos. So I guess me and Get Up in Game have a very like-minded idea of Marvel Champions because, I don't think I disagreed that much with him on this video. Anyways, guys, I will try to pump out some more. Now, this was not like a hero spotlight response. This was kind of response video of something other than that about Marvel Champions. And I thought this was an interesting one. And I figure I've done D20, I've done Nelson, I might as well do Get Up in Game. If you have a content creator or a particular video that you want me to respond to see my opinions and thoughts on, you can put it in the comment section, and I'll definitely might try to do it on my next kind of response video. Again, guys, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and I'm really enjoying the comments you guys are giving me. And I think what I'll do is after a few response videos, we'll do an actual review comment video where I'll go back and try to live respond to some of your comments. And because I know I've gotten quite a bit of comments on a lot of different videos of these response videos. So yeah, so leave your comments, ask me questions, and we'll probably do kind of a Des Christ speaks to the subscriber videos, answering questions and whatnot. All right, and I'll see you guys on the next one.